My brother called me the night before the hearing to tell me he loved me. I hadn't heard those words from him in 4 years. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "just know that none of this was personal." I held the phone against my ear and looked out the window at the snow coming down over the backyard, the same backyard where we used to build forts out of old moving boxes when we were kids, where my father taught us both to skate on the frozen patch he'd flood every December. I almost told my brother that I forgave him right then. Almost. "I know," I said instead, and I hung up. The next morning, my lawyer met me outside the courthouse on Wellington Street at 8, 15 inches the freezing cold. He was already stressed before we even got inside. He'd been stressed for weeks. Every time we talked, he'd ask me the same thing, and every time I'd give him the same answer, and every time he'd shake his head like I was the most frustrating client he'd ever had. He asked me again that morning, breath fogging in the February air, "Are you absolutely certain you don't want to fight this?" I pulled my coat tighter and nodded. "Then at least tell me why," he said. "After everything you've put into that business, after everything." I didn't answer him right away. I looked up at the building. My brother and his wife were probably already inside. His lawyer, a man I'd never met but had heard plenty about, was probably already preparing his closing remarks, already mentally celebrating, "Because they're about to learn something," I finally said, "that I can't teach them any other way." My lawyer stared at me for a long moment. Then he opened the door and let me walk inside first. My brother's name is Daniel. He's 5 years older than me, which means he was 29 when our father got sick, 30 when our parents sat the two of us down at the kitchen table in their house in Guelph and told us they needed to talk about the business. My father had built Calloway Brothers Hardware over 32 years. He'd started it with one storefront on Stone Road, selling tools and building supplies to contractors and homeowners in the area. By the time I was born, there were 2 locations. By the time I graduated high school, there were 4 Guelph, Cambridge, Kitchener, and 1 in Waterloo that had opened just the year before. It wasn't a giant corporation, but it was real. It employed 46 people full-time. It was our family's name on the sign. When my father's Parkinson's progressed to the point where he couldn't manage the day-to-day anymore, Daniel was supposed to step in. That had always been the plan. Daniel was the oldest. Daniel had worked summers at the store all through university. Daniel had a business degree from Laurier and a wife who everyone thought was wonderful and opinions about everything. The problem was that Daniel had also, somewhere in his late 20s, developed a deep aversion to anything that felt like actual work. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's what my father eventually said himself, quietly, in the hospital room, when it was just the 2 of us. "Your brother is a good man," my father told me, "but he doesn't have the patience for the hard parts." What happened instead was this. Daniel took over nominally, and I, 24 years old, 2 years out of a commerce degree at Guelph, working in purchasing at a logistics company, started getting phone calls. At first they were just questions. "What do you think about this supplier? How would you handle this HR situation? Do you know anything about provincial payroll regulations?" Then the calls got more frequent. Then I started driving up on weekends. Then I took a leave from my actual job. Then, 6 months after my father stepped back, my parents sat us both down and asked if I would consider coming on formally to help stabilize things. Daniel agreed. He said it with a smile, like he was doing me a favor. I moved back to Guelph. I took a salary that was, to put it gently, not reflective of what I was actually doing. I restructured the supplier contracts. I renegotiated the lease on the Waterloo location, which had been hemorrhaging money. I replaced the inventory management system with something that actually worked. I hired 2 new store managers who knew what they were doing. I dealt with a CRA audit that, had I not caught the discrepancies in the previous year's filings, would have resulted in a very unpleasant reassessment. And Daniel showed up to the Christmas party and shook hands with employees and talked about expansion like it was his idea. For 2 years, this was the arrangement. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was for my father. I told myself a lot of things. Then my father passed away in March, and everything changed. The will was straightforward. My parents had discussed it with both of us before my father got too ill to have the conversation. The business would be divided equally 50% to Daniel, 50% to me. The family home in Guelph would go to my mother. Whatever savings remained would be split equitably. Daniel had nodded along at the lawyer's office like this, all made perfect sense to him. What happened next took about 6 weeks. First, Daniel started coming into the office more, not to help to watch. He'd sit in the chair across from my desk and ask questions that sounded like questions but were really statements dressed up in question marks. Don't you think we should be looking at the Waterloo location differently? I'm wondering if the Kitchener manager is really the right fit. Have you thought about whether the Cambridge lease renewal makes sense at this point? I answered his questions carefully. I showed him the numbers. I explained the reasoning behind each decision I'd made. He'd nod and say things like, "Interesting, and I'll have to think about that." Then one evening he called me from the driveway of the business he'd apparently driven there after I'd left, and told me he thought we needed to restructure how decisions were made. He thought, given that we were equal partners, things should require both signatures, both approvals, both agreements before anything moved forward. I told him that was a reasonable thing to discuss. He had a lawyer draft a new partnership agreement by the following Friday. I read it over the weekend. I brought it to my own lawyer on Monday. My lawyer read it, looked up at me, and said, "This effectively gives him veto power over every operational decision while assigning you all the administrative liability." I asked what he recommended. He recommended I not sign it. I didn't sign it. Daniel stopped speaking to me for 11 days. Then he called and said we needed to meet in person. I drove to his house in Puslinch, a beautiful property by the way, the kind of property that had been substantially funded by years of our father's distributions from the business, and sat across from him and his wife at their dining room table while they told me that they felt the current arrangement wasn't working. His wife did most of the talking. She was organized about it. She had points. She said that Daniel felt sidelined, that the business had been built on the Calloway name, and that the Calloway name was his, that the employees looked to him as the leader, and it was confusing to have me operating as though I were in charge. I asked Daniel directly, "Do you want to run the business yourself?" He hesitated for just a moment, just long enough for me to see the answer, and then said yes. I went home and thought about it for 3 days. Then I made him an offer. The offer was this. I would transfer my 50% share to Daniel. Full ownership, clean break. In exchange, I asked for fair market value for my stake, calculated based on the last 2 years of financials, paid out over 4 years. I also asked, and this is the part that mattered, that Daniel acknowledge in writing that he understood and accepted all existing obligations attached to the business, every liability, every ongoing contract, every employment commitment, the CRA payment plan we were still in the middle of, the supplier agreements I had renegotiated, some of which had penalty clauses for early termination, the equipment financing on the new inventory system, the lease obligations across all 4 locations, totaling just over $2.3 million in remaining commitments. I didn't hide any of this. I had my lawyer prepare a full disclosure document. Everything was itemized. Everything was explained in plain language. Daniel's lawyer reviewed it. And here is the thing that I still think about sometimes, late at night. His lawyer either didn't read it carefully enough, or he read it and didn't understand it, or he understood it and didn't explain it clearly to Daniel. I genuinely don't know which one. But what I do know is that Daniel signed. He signed everything. He shook my hand. He told me this was the right decision for everyone. I walked out of that office and sat in my car in the parking lot for a few minutes. I wasn't happy exactly. I was something quieter than that. I drove home to my apartment. I'd been renting a place near the university. Nothing fancy, and I made dinner, and I didn't think about the business for the first time in 2 years. That was September. By February, Daniel had filed suit to have the transfer voided. His claim was that I had misrepresented the financial state of the business, that I had withheld information, that the disclosure document had been designed to obscure rather than clarify. His lawyer, a different lawyer now, a more aggressive one, framed it as a breach of fiduciary duty. As fraud. My lawyer called me when the filing came through and read me the highlights. When he was done, there was a pause on the line. "Do you want to countersue?" he asked. "No." Another pause. "Do you want to contest the claim vigorously?" "No." "Then what do you want to do?" I told him I wanted to let Daniel have the business back. I could hear him set something down heavily on his desk. "I need you to explain that to me." I explained it. It took a while. When I was finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, very slowly, "You understand that if you concede, you likely forfeit the buyout payments." "I know." "And you understand that he's calling you a fraudster and a legal filing." "I know that too." "And you're still telling me to let him win?" "Yes." He made me come into the office the next day to have the conversation again in person. He wanted to make sure I hadn't lost my mind. We went through it twice. I answered every question he had. By the end, he wasn't happy about it, but he understood. Barely. "You know what you're doing?" he asked. "I think so," I said. "You'd better," he said. The morning of the hearing, Daniel's lawyer stood up and laid out their case. He was confident. He had a good suit and good posture, and the kind of voice that sounds like it's never been wrong about anything. He talked about the complexity of the disclosure document. He talked about the power imbalance between a trained business person and someone who had simply inherited a stake. He talked about Daniel's good faith. I sat beside my lawyer and kept my face neutral. When it was our turn, my lawyer stood and said that we did not intend to contest the transfer. We were prepared to accept the court's direction to return ownership of Calloway Brothers Hardware to Daniel Calloway in full. Daniel, across the room, smiled. His wife, seated in the gallery, exhaled visibly. His lawyer blinked. He hadn't expected it to go this smoothly. He started to say something about the buyout payments, about damages, and then my lawyer raised one hand. "We also ask," my lawyer said, "that the court confirm, for the record, that Mr. Calloway accepts full assumption of all obligations listed in the original disclosure agreement, as he signed and initialed at the time of transfer, including current obligations." Daniel's lawyer said that was of course understood, that his client had always accepted those obligations, that this was a straightforward matter of. My lawyer set a document on the table. "Then perhaps your client would like to review the current CRA reassessment notice," my lawyer said, "which arrived 6 weeks ago and which, as the new owner of record, he will now be responsible for addressing, along with the notice of default from the equipment financing company, and the updated lease obligation summary following the Waterloo landlord's decision to accelerate the renewal clause last month." The room got very quiet. Daniel's lawyer picked up the document. He read the first page. He turned to the second page. His expression didn't change dramatically, lawyers are trained for that, but something behind his eyes went very still. Daniel leaned over and whispered something. His lawyer held up a finger without looking at him. He kept reading. The CRA reassessment had come out of a deeper audit triggered by the original one I'd managed. The assessors had gone back further than I had, and found discrepancies from before my involvement from Daniel's brief period of nominal oversight before I came on board. The amount owing, with interest and penalties, was significant. Not ruinous on its own, but substantial. And it had to be addressed within 90 days. The equipment financing default was smaller but more immediately pressing. 2 payments had been missed during the transition period, when Daniel had been restructuring the management team and had, apparently, not properly set up the payment schedule. And the Waterloo lease. I had negotiated that lease carefully, with a specific clause that allowed the landlord to accelerate the renewal negotiation if ownership of the business changed hands. I had disclosed this in the document Daniel signed. It was on page 7, clearly marked. The landlord had exercised that clause. The new terms he was proposing were considerably less favorable than what I had secured. All of this was now Daniel's. All of it had been Daniel's since September, technically, though the legal dispute had complicated the practical reality. Now, with the court confirming the transfer, there was no ambiguity. Daniel's lawyer asked for a recess. The judge granted 15 minutes. I went to the hallway and stood near the window that looked out over the street. It had stopped snowing. Everything outside was white and still. My lawyer came to stand beside me. He didn't say anything for a moment. "How did you know the reassessment was coming?" he finally asked. "I didn't know exactly," I said. "But I knew the original audit had flagged things from before I arrived. I knew it was likely. And the lease clause. That was deliberate," I said. "I disclosed it. It was his to read." My lawyer nodded slowly. "You know he's going to say you set him up." "He can say that," I said. "The document is the document. He signed it. His lawyer reviewed it." When the recess ended, Daniel's lawyer did not look like a man who had just won something. He approached us in the hallway, just the 2 lawyers at first, and there was a conversation I was not privy to. Then my lawyer came back to me. "They want to discuss a settlement," he said. "No," I said. "They're suggesting—" "No," I said again. "Let the court confirm the transfer. That's all I want." He went back. More talking. Then Daniel himself came over, without his lawyer. Just him, in his good coat, standing in the courthouse hallway looking like someone had just explained to him the actual cost of something he'd thought was free. "You knew," he said. "You knew all of this was coming." "I disclosed everything," I said. "All of it was in the document. The lease, The CRA thing. You knew. I knew what I knew, I said. The same information was available to you. He looked at me for a long moment. He looked the way he used to look when we were kids, and something hadn't gone the way he'd expected, and he was trying to figure out whose fault it was. I don't understand why you didn't just fight me, he said. Why didn't you fight? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about my father in the hospital room saying that Daniel was a good man but didn't have the patience for the hard parts. I thought about 2 years of weekends and late nights and a CRA audit and a lease negotiation and 46 employees whose livelihoods had depended, in ways none of them knew, on decisions I'd made quietly and carefully. Because fighting you wouldn't have taught you anything, I said. And you needed to learn this. He didn't say anything. The business is yours, I said. It's always been yours, in your mind. Now it's yours in every other way too. All of it. I went back to the courtroom. The court confirmed the transfer. That was 14 months ago. The Waterloo location closed in October. Daniel negotiated with the landlord but couldn't get terms that made the numbers work. 12 employees lost their jobs. I know 2 of them personally. One of them texted me when it happened. I didn't know what to say. The CRA reassessment was settled in November. I don't know the exact amount. It's not my business anymore. But I heard through mutual contacts that it required refinancing some of the equipment and a personal loan from Daniel's in-laws. The 3 remaining locations are still operating. I check sometimes just to see. I hope they stay open. I mean that. 46 people, 34 now still depend on that business for their livelihoods, and they didn't make any of the choices that led to this. I'm working again. A different company now, operations management based in Waterloo. I like it. I'm good at it. I don't miss the name on the door. My mother calls me every Sunday. She doesn't ask about the business. We talk about other things. She's thinking about moving to a smaller place, maybe a condo near my aunt in Burlington. I told her I'd help her look. Daniel called me in December. We talked for about 20 minutes. It was careful and a little formal, the way conversations are when 2 people are trying to figure out if they still know each other. He didn't apologize exactly. He said he understood things differently now. He said running it alone was harder than he'd expected. I told him I knew. He asked if I had any advice. I thought about that for a moment, about everything I'd learned in those 2 years, about supplier contracts and lease clauses and payroll systems and the 1,000 small decisions that add up to whether a business survives or doesn't. Talk to your store managers, I said. Really talk to them. They know things you don't. He said he would. Maybe he will. I don't know. People change slowly, and sometimes not at all. And sometimes the lesson that was supposed to reshape them just leaves a bruise that fades, and then they go back to exactly who they were before. I've seen that happen too. But I think about something a professor said in one of my second-year commerce classes, a woman who'd run her own company for 15 years before going into teaching. She said that the most expensive education in business isn't the degree. It's the first time something that was supposed to be an asset becomes a liability while you're holding it. Daniel is getting that education now. I hope it takes. My lawyer sent me a bill in March, his final invoice for the matter. At the bottom, below the itemized hours, he'd written a handwritten note. Just 2 lines. I've been practicing for 19 years. I've never had a client do what you did. I'm still not sure if it was brilliant or reckless. Then below that, probably both. I kept the note. It's in a folder in my desk drawer. Some mornings, when I'm driving to the office in Waterloo, and the highway is clear, and the fields on either side are just starting to turn green again after the winter, I think about the courthouse hallway. About Daniel's face when he finally understood the weight of what he'd been so eager to carry. About the moment his lawyer stopped looking like someone who had won. I don't feel good about it exactly. I don't feel bad either. I feel something that doesn't have a clean name, something that lives in the space between justice and grief, between the lesson you needed to give and the relationship you had to spend to give it. Ownership is not just the name on the sign. It's not the handshake or the title or the story you tell at family dinners about the legacy your father built. It's the Tuesday morning when the CRA calls. It's the lease clause on page 7. It's the payroll that doesn't care what your last name is or how long you felt entitled to something. My father knew that. He spent 32 years learning it. I learned it the fast way. Daniel is learning it now. Some lessons you can't be given. You can only earn them, slowly, in the way that costs the most. I hope he earns it well.